next up on our list will be Timecrimes.
Okay. Yes, then. The time travel mechanic in Nacho Vigalondo's Los Cronocrímenes, Timecrimes, is similar to that of the more traditional grandfather paradox type, though in a massively compressed time frame where travel too early in your life causes unforeseen and hugely undesired consequences. Cara Elhalde plays Hector, a pretty average middle-aged guy who is in the process of moving into his new house with his wife. Sitting in a deck chair in his back garden and idly using binoculars, he sees an attractive young woman in the woods at the edge of his property. This woman proceeds to take off her shirt and, for some reason intrigued by this, he decides to investigate while his wife goes to buy food. In the woods, Hector finds the woman naked and unconscious, but before he can check on her, he is stabbed in the arm by a mystery assailant, a man in a trench coat with his face shrouded in pink bandages. Hector flees and eventually finds himself inside of a laboratory underneath a building. Here he finds a walkie-talkie and begins talking with someone who tells Hector that he can see his pursuer on the security monitors and instructs him to exit the lab by the rear and make his way up the hill to the silo, where he will be safe. Once inside the silo, Hector meets the man behind the voice, a young scientist, played by director Vigalondo, doing extra work on an experiment while everyone else has gone home for the weekend. He instructs Hector to hide inside of the large tank in the centre of the room, where his attacker won't think to look for him. The lid of the tank closes and just as soon opens again. The scientist is still there, but the attacker is gone and, despite night having fallen by the time Hector arrived at the silo, it is now daylight. What is going on? Well, though he's unwilling to believe it at first, Hector has travelled back in time by about 80 minutes, and things are about to go, in the parlance of our times, tits up. This is one of the films I've been looking forward to most, actually, and it was actually this film that had prompted me to want to do this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Buggered if I can remember why now, of course. It's so long ago I'd heard about this and thought it was really interesting. And I'll admit, for about the first 45 minutes, I was a little disappointed. It wasn't doing an awful lot for me, but then I found it actually built really, really successfully, and in the end I found it really, really rewarding. It's got some time travel sci-fi stuff, but there's also a bit of a mystery and a bit of a thriller element to it, and possibly even some touching on horror bits. Yeah. And I just found it really rewarding. Cara Elhalde is an actor who I think I've only previously seen in Tambien La Lluvia, Even the Rain, which you and I both very much liked. We did that on our Social Issues podcast, and I've liked him a lot in this. He plays a very good ordinary guy, who responds in particularly believable ways to the crazy stuff that is going on around him.
I liked this film overall. I think mainly I did like it because of Ronaldo's performance. He's quite likeable. It's easy to engage with on this film, which I think is fortunate because a lot of the time I was watching it, I kind of swung back and forward as to whether this made perfect sense or he was just making the stupidest decisions possible at any one time. Because there's points of it where, he's told at one point early runnings that if things don't happen the way it happened on basically another cycle through, then he's possibly going to erase himself from the timeline, which I think really is the only justification he can have for doing a lot of the things that he does. Because, and when you think of it that way, it probably doesn't make sense in the terms of the paradox that it sets up. I'm not entirely convinced that the logic works if you think it all the way through, but it doesn't really matter. It's still quite an entertaining film for all of that. But there's no real reason he should pick up a trench coat from the garbage apart from the fact that he'd seen it before, you know what I mean? Things like that. It's just some of his actions are only explicable by the fact that it needs to occur for a film to happen. So it's a bit strange in that regard. But it didn't stop me enjoying it, so...
I feel like it's been a little ungenerous to it. Is that a word? I feel there should be a different word that means the opposite of generous, but I can't really think what it is.
I think it's ingenue.
Ingeniero. It's very engineer. I think that's been a little unfair because I felt like the way I looked at it was that at first he is somewhat confused and certainly massively disbelieving, but it felt to me like that while his character's no genius, his character's not stupid either, and that he's beginning to put the pieces together, which is why he picked up the quote. I didn't feel like it was... when I saw when he picks up that trench coat, it didn't feel to me like he was, oh, I'll just put this trench coat on. It's more like he saw the trench coat and had already made the connection in his mind. It's like, oh, right, okay, I know I need to do this now. I felt like he was...
Yeah, but that's the thing, right? It's always a discussion you get with time travel. If he didn't do that in the first instance, why would he be doing it now? The loops of it, when it gets recursive like that, I don't think make sense when you think of it from the view of the first time through. But maybe I've just not sat down with a pencil and mapped it out well enough. You know what I mean? I've maybe just not sketched the timelines accurately enough, because it gets a bit messy. I think it's well handled. I think you can always really tell what's going on and what the intent of the story is meant to be. And so in that regard, I don't mind it, because it's doing it well on its own terms. I think in absolute sense, maybe it doesn't make it, but then again, it's about time travel, so this is the sort of thing you wind up dealing with. So
you have to cut it some slack. And yeah, normally that is the sort of thing that bothers me particularly, as you know, Scott, like plot holes and logic failings and stuff. But in this film, I just wasn't particularly feeling that. I don't know. It did feel more like the character's disbelieving at first, but when he's like, even when he's sort of giving good advice by Nacho Vigalondo's character and things, and like, I can see why he doesn't follow through, and then finds out the inevitability of it later.
Yeah,
because that's how humans are. It's like, if you keep doing that thing or smoking or whatever, you're going to get cancer. Yes, I know, but I don't actually. My mind right at the moment is not actually believing that potential future thing might happen. Yeah, and it's like that, but just a hugely compressed time frame.
Yeah,
and I just thought it was a very, very successful thing, because it's almost like you can just see that he's doing these things with at least initial good intent.
Yeah.
And then everything's going wrong, and then you understand that it's going wrong because it has to go wrong, because it's already going wrong for it to go wrong. And time travel films are really hard to talk about. We need lots of new tenses. But then at the same time, I think what's interesting about it too is it's so revealing of character, because he seems like a fairly decent, normal guy at the start. You don't think he's particularly good or bad. It's like, here's a guy. It's like, if that was me, I wouldn't be looking at the naked woman through the binoculars. I'd have stopped. But at the same point, he hadn't sought her out to do that. It's like, he was sitting on the edge of the property, he sees this woman, he looks at her for maybe a minute longer than he ought to. People have done worse things, and he wasn't intending harming her. And then the other things he does, like, you see them the timeline start to tie together, and you see the red van, you're like, oh, right, okay, so I know how that thing happened. And his actions, you can understand, it's like, and you see how they go wrong, and what he was trying to do, but it just didn't work for this other reason. It's okay. But then, and it's why I think it worked for me that he was putting the trench coat and stuff on, because there's clearly the wheels are turning under his in his mind. He's got some intelligence there, because like, okay, right, I recognise this coat, I know what I have to do, I know where I am now. Because then he starts doing the rather, frankly, evil things towards the end, and that kind of really reveals that he's not as good a person as you think he might have been and he hoped he was.
Yeah.
And I thought it was fairly consistent, that it slowly reveals the character's character. That does not sound good. That's not a pleasant sentence, but I can't think of a better way to put that. But it kind of felt consistent, which is what I really liked about it. It's like there wasn't any sort of huge jump in change in personality or anything like that. And I just found the thing really satisfying that it built in such a way. I said, for the first half of the film, I was like, I mean, I can follow this fine, but it's, I guess it's there, it's okay. But then it's building, sort of becoming more thriller-like. And it's like, oh, now I'm getting this. This film is really building for me. And I just found it a really rewarding watch.
Yeah, I mean, on its own terms, I like it. And I still got drawn into it and enjoyed it. It's just, on reflection, I don't think it holds an awful lot of water when it's really based around the tenets of these things have to happen because they have happened. It doesn't need to. I don't think it needed to. And I think there's an awful lot of weight being placed on that one scene where the director's, explaining things with an arrow and going back to another arrow. And basically that is the load-bearing component of his entire actions. And I don't think a 30-second sketch on a drawing board is enough to really maintain that.
Sketch is a stretch. It's got,
Yes.
it's basically a line.
Yeah,
Which that scene bothered me a bit because I'm like, you're not explaining this in the correct direction, but okay.
But look, if nothing else, it presents a rare instance of Chekhov's flat pack side table, and for that it should be applauded. I mean, of all the things this film thought it needed to set up, why it needed to set up the presence of a table in a house is beyond me, given that you're talking about time travel. I would have gladly accepted that houses are a thing that normally contain tables.
It's certainly my second favourite Chekhov's item in this podcast, because my favourite Chekhov's item was clearly Chekhov's magic futuristic dish detergent from
Yes.
Tomorrow I'll wake up and scald myself with tea, because that was fantastic.
Yes. In the future, all your dishes will dissolve. Okay.
With mild green, Chekhov's fairy liquid. Yeah.
Yes, but I liked Timecrimes quite a bit, and I would still recommend anyone watch it. I thought it was quite enjoyable, and I got quite involved into it. So yes, give that a bash.
And it's probably worth pointing out too, it's another film that we're covering today that, again, compared to one film in particular, this is an enormous budget, but made for $2.5 million. It's not a lot.
Yeah.
And most of the films we're covering this don't have a high budget. Sci-fi and I'll come back to this later, can lend itself to really high budget stuff, but also a really interesting sci-fi premise can be done without a lot of work, without a lot of budget. And this podcast is kind of shown that over and over, I feel.
Yeah.